So I'm very excited about this conversation. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kay Collier. My artist name is Catherine Hastings. I specialize in the art of letter writing. And a lot of what I want to bring into the world is this kind of slow, intentional movement of letter writing and beauty, and really teach people how our words can help us transform ourselves and deepen our relationships, and really bring in a space in our life for beauty and kind of intentional communication. And so when I found your work through Life by Alyssa, I thought, oh, you would be perfect to come speak to us about inner child work. A lot of the kind of esoteric letters that I teach are like how to send letters through time, or how to speak with a historic figure, or how to burn a letter. That's something you just need to let go. And so I just thought there's this real kind of tender piece with inner child work. So
Mhm.
could you just tell us a little bit about your background in your work with inner child work?
Yeah, you bet. So yeah, my name is Matt Landsiedel, and I am an intuitive life and spiritual coach and counselor. So I do both coaching and counseling. I love both modalities, and my background is actually in addiction counseling. So I worked in the addiction space for 10 years, and got out of that and started doing coaching work, and then now I'm kind of doing a bit of a blended model. So I primarily work with highly sensitive people, empaths, and gay men, which are all three traits of who I am. And I help these people develop a stronger sense of their authentic self, and develop stronger self-worth through helping heal attachment trauma is one area, which inner child work is. A lot of it is attachment trauma healing, and healing toxic shame. So I've identified these as two very primary things that need to be healed if we want to have a stronger connection to our authentic self.
Mhm.
And the purpose of the work that I do is for us all to feel more safe in being our authentic self, so we can have more meaningful connection in our lives.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of my life masking and being afraid of who I was and sharing who I was with people. And that led to not very fulfilling relationships. And I felt like I was being connected to through the masks I was wearing, and not through who I actually am. And so I made it my mission to help people heal and empower so that they can have meaningful connection, because we live in a relational paradigm. Everything in this paradigm we live in is about relationships. And so relationships are extremely important. And I think a lot of people need support in how to have a relationship with themselves primarily, and
Yeah.
how to have relationships with others. And inner child work is just that. It's learning how to heal the relationship we have with ourselves through this kind of sub-personality structure of the inner child. We can do a lot of deep healing work to get to a place where we can feel more confident in ourselves, and sharing ourselves with the people around us. Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, it's so beautifully put. And it's something I hadn't really thought about with inner child work is your inner child being kind of a pure version of yourself. And
Yeah,
as you age, you develop these masks as protection, but then it is those masks that end up keeping you more distant and
yeah,
being a barrier.
totally.
And you'd mentioned before we started recording that there are four main types of, I guess, inner children. And maybe I'm getting that wrong. Could you explain a little bit about first, just what is the inner child, and how do
Yeah.
we understand our own inner children?
Yeah, exactly. So I define the inner child as a subconscious sub-personality structure made up of past memories, emotions, and versions of ourselves from childhood. And these can be positive and negative, right? We have this kind of innocence, this playfulness as a child. That's a part of this sub-personality structure. And then we also have the wounds. And a lot of these wounds come from unmet needs that we experience in our childhood. So it could be, let's say, the need for closeness or attention, and we experience neglect and disconnection in our childhood. Then we develop wounding around this, and we internalize these, and they become part of our subconscious personality. And we oftentimes, through that lens, can see the world as unsafe.
Mhm.
Um, and we feel like we need to mask, we need to disconnect, we need to become the lone wolf, which was a very much a thing that I used in order to protect myself. And we sever ourselves from attachment and connection because of these wounds. but I'll explain the well, maybe the best part maybe to start is to talk a bit about these needs, because there's I think it was Tony Robbins who did this research, but talking about the 6 primary basic human needs that we have in the domain of emotional, mental, and spiritual. Not so much physical in the sense of like, you know, food and shelter. I'm not talking about those basic needs. I'm talking more about things like growth, love and connection, significance, certainty, uncertainty, and contribution. Those are the 6. Growth being like, we have a desire to learn, to constantly learn, and to be able to grow and to acquire knowledge, these sorts of things. Love and connection is pretty self-explanatory, but we have a need to feel connected to, and it's in the early formative years, it's to our caregiver, and to experience unconditional love. Significance meaning we feel the deep need to be seen and to be known and to feel like we matter, is a significant need. Certainty being safety, security, predictability, boundaries, these sorts of things. And then uncertainty is kind of the opposite of that. We have a deep yearning as human beings for play, for spontaneity, for adventure, to explore the world around us, right? And that's very uncertain. It's this like kind of almost the mystery of life can excite us, right? Also terrify us, but I speak on this side more from the you know, invigoration we can get from that mystery. And then the last one is contribution, and that is like you know, our desire to be of service, to volunteer, to contribute something meaningful to the world. And you know, we look at these 6 human needs, and there's lots of opportunity for disruption or injury to these needs and them not being met. And I want to speak to the parents out there that are listening to this, because I want to offer some empathy to parents, because it's extremely complex. I don't have children, so I'm speaking theoretically, and I'm sure you can speak to this because you're a mother, right? It's extremely complex and delicate raising a child. With all human beings have complex needs. Some children have even more complex needs, and it's almost nearly impossible for a parent to meet all the needs of their children, right? And it's nearly impossible for any human being to meet every need of another human being. So it's part of the human condition for us to go through life with our needs being unmet. But in the formative years, when we have significant unmet needs, it can lead to trauma, it can lead to inner child wounding, and it can create an unsafe environment in ourselves and in our relationships. So it's important. I think part of this work is really getting clear about what these unmet needs were and how we can start to meet them as adults. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go on. But the 4 wounds are shame and guilt wound, which could be characterized as I am bad or flawed, made to feel guilty for having needs or boundaries. The second wound is the rejection wound. So I am not good enough. Could be the character or the message that we received. The next one, number 3, is the neglect wound. So I don't matter. No one sees me or cares about me. And the 4th one is the abandonment or the disappointment wound, which is I'll be left, or I'll be let down and disappointed, or I have been let down and disappointed, or I have been left. And there's lots of wounds, like but these tend to be the 4 primary ones in kind of like pop psychology and what's being put forward around this space. So yeah,
I mean, it's heavy, and I wonder with everyone watching and listening, when they're hearing that list, if they're like, oh, immediately I'm like, the first 2 for me especially, I'm like, ooh, those were parenting tactics in our household. And like, as a mom, like I agree, like you can't get it all right meeting the needs, in part because we're all such unique people and we have skills that others can't see, or strengths that we can't see. But it's interesting as a mom, like trying to break certain cycles, and the one of shame and guilt as a parenting tactic, or rejection. Like if, you know, you don't do the thing that we want you to do, you're out of here. That, you know, I have some sympathy, I guess, for the generation above us, because, you know, in the US, they had parents who'd been in the war, and who knows, like maybe PTSD issues or childhood wasn't prioritized. Like kids were kind of just like maybe like ornaments to the life, maybe in a way where, I
Yeah,
think at least our generation, there's very much a sense of forging people and like letting them be who they are, and how do you create the environment for that. But
exactly.
yeah, I know, I just, not to get us too much off on a tangent, but for me it was like, oh, some of these I can see immediately, but how does someone go about understanding which of the wounds is most pronounced, or does everyone have a little bit, or
Mhm.
how do we think about the wounds?
Yeah, well, I want to read off a list, but I wanted to say something about what you said because, like, shame and rejection, it's so interesting because if you look at the model that most parents use with their children, it's a model called classical conditioning. So it's reward and punishment, right? So when you do good, you get rewarded. When you do bad, you get punished, which is it's a great model. But what happens is when, let's say, a parent has wounding or inner child wounding that they haven't healed yet, their child's behavior is going through a filter that they then perceive what is good and what is bad. So
Mhm.
if a child could be simply seeking attention from a parent, and a parent can see that as bad and could shame or reject them for that, and then
Yeah.
they're getting shamed on or rejected for getting a need met. So when we're using classical conditioning, we have to be really clear about, like, is this going through the lens of my own wounding, and is there something in me that hasn't been healed yet that I'm projecting onto my child and saying
Yeah.
it's not okay for you to be like that,
Yeah.
right? And that's where parenting, there's so much it's a very contentious issue, right? Like, how
Mhm.
are you raising your children versus how am I raising my children?
Yeah.
And then that's why, because we all have different filters of reality based off of what is right and what is wrong because of the experiences we had through our own parental,
Yeah.
relationships. So I just wanted to bring voice to that. It's really because that can be a really damaging style of conditioning when it's not delivered in a way where the child is then being,
Mhm.
like, introduced to or kind of like talked to about what the behavior was going on. Instead of just shaming it and rejecting it, let's have a conversation around what this behavior means, what it means to me and my values, and then the child really gets to feel like kind of nurtured through that experience. So there's ways you can use classical conditioning that it's not going to be super damaging.
Mhm.
But okay, so I made a list of 16 signs of a wounded inner child. So
Okay.
this can be like the audience can just take inventory of themselves and just look at, like, okay, which ones of these do I notice in my own experience? And yeah, so we'll go from there. So I would say childlike emotional responses, so like lashing out, slamming doors, throwing temper tantrums, silent treatments, yelling, mocking others, these sorts of things. So if your relationships are characterized by emotional immaturity, there's going to be a strong indication that there is a wounded inner child at play. A strong inner critic. I describe usually the strong inner critic is something called the parent ego. So when we have a parenting or a parent in our lives that was very highly critical of us, we internalize that dialogue, and we start to talk to ourselves that way. So we might become our own bully because our parent was a bully to us. So that's a big one. You're being unsure of our needs and how to get them met. So oftentimes people that struggle with this, they had to self-sacrifice for a parent. So maybe your parent was an alcoholic and you had to take care of them, and you had to grow up quicker than you wanted to, and your needs became secondary to your parent, right? We learned that self-sacrificing is a way to survive and cope with the chaos around us.
Mhm.
Difficulty knowing and setting healthy boundaries, feeling guilty for standing up for yourself, a fear of conflict, a fear of abandonment, or a fear of intimacy. So either fear of abandonment or intimacy, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. I would say it usually characterizes insecure attachment. So we struggle with intimacy, we struggle with closeness, or with space, I should say, and that can be definitely insecure attachment style. Feeling inadequate or unworthy of love and belonging, afraid to ask for help, becoming activated when not listened to or ignored, self-betrayal, so betraying ourselves and our own needs for love or validation, people-pleasing, performing or achieving for love or worthiness, self-shaming, restriction, punishment, again, more classical conditioning, unconsciously denying other people's realities or truths. So other people need to be wrong in order for you to be right. And excessive reliance on external validation or parental approval. So there's way more that we could come up with, but this is the kind of a list that I just thought, I'm like off the top of my head, like these are things that I would definitely, in client sessions, if I identified these things, I would start to wonder, like, is there a wounded inner child here at play that we would want to start to work with?
Yeah.
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 And are there people, and maybe this is just showing my hand a little bit of like, wow, I clearly have work I need to do here. But are there people that hear that list and they're like, oh no, like no inner child work, or do all of us at some level have inner child work that needs to be done, or maybe like inner child is good, but we could bring the relationship to be better? For anyone that's listening that maybe wasn't on that list, I'm very happy for you, but also, are there people like that?
Well, it's part of the human condition, and I'll share this, that I've been doing this work for 15 years.
Yeah.
And I've done intense amount of work on myself. Probably it's been 23 years now I've been doing personal development work and healing work, and I'm still working on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if the inner child is just a constant relationship that we have, no different than the relationship we would have with our actual child, right? Like it's very dynamic. It's always moving and shifting. And I believe that, like, let's say when we heal and we level up, we are now able to meet ourselves from a new level of consciousness. So we see things that we didn't before. So it feels like, oh my God, another thing that I got to work on. Well, it was always there, but we're just meeting ourselves from a different consciousness. So we're able to see the things that need to be worked on. I do believe that there are people out there that have had such a secure childhood that they don't have childhood wounding, but they would still have an inner child, and they would have an inner child to connect with. And, that is that curious, playful part of us. So everyone has an inner child. But it's the wounded inner child that I would say, people that have had struggled with, let's say childhood trauma or any sort of childhood adverse events would be in this category. So,
yeah. That's really beautifully put. And I think too, like when you think about it being lifelong work, the work will be there, but it will be different. And there's a joy to kind of the next chapter of wherever you're at. And I don't know, I've always kind of dreamed of being an 80-year-old woman who's like super wise. And I see 80-year-old women as very young and playful, because they get to that age where they just can let go of expectations and kind of, not all women at that age, but like that's kind of my dream of like, if I keep doing this work in 60, 70 years, what's my life going to look like? I think that's an easier mindset than this work is never going away.
And it's cumulative. Everything that we do, we're progressing and we're always moving forward with it. And I always say, people are always like, why do you do this work? Like for me, like, why do I do my own personal development work? And it's to have more peace and contentment in my life, and to not be governed by so much fear. And, when we're working with the inner child, we're restoring safety. And, most of us are terrified of X, Y, and Z, you name it, like public speaking, relationships, all these things that we're terrified of. It's because our inner child doesn't feel safe to be able to enter these things with so much uncertainty, right? So a lot of this work provides us safety, and the reparenting process is how we heal the inner child and how we restore safety back within ourselves.
Well, and let's talk a little bit then about how we get started with the work. And I know, for this conversation, it's more about letter writing and how we can connect through writing or speaking to the inner child. What advice would you have for just kind of first steps there?
Well, I kind of have a 4-step process for doing this work that I think is really important. The first step is to set the intention that you want to do this work. I use the intention, I welcome a healing and empowering relationship with my inner child. And we're saying, yes, like I'm planting the seed. This is what I want to do, and I want to bring this forward. And it's really magical when we do that. When we welcome an intention to be set, we're working with spirit, we're working with the universe, we're working with God, whatever you believe in, you're creating that intention. And when we have the intention, it's like we can start to manifest, we can start to recall memories, We might have dreams about what our bedroom looked like as a child, like these sorts of things. And it starts to bring everything to the surface to be worked with, right? So we have to call that forward. And then the three stages beyond that are reconnection, healing, and integration. And the reconnection is probably where I would say let's start, because that is where we're starting to connect with this inner child, make meaning of it. What even is this to us? For different people, it's gonna be something different. And you have more kinesthetic people, it might be something that they can feel, and people that are visual, it might be a photograph of you when you were a child. For audio, it might be listening to home videos and listening to your voice when you were younger, and it really connects you back into who you are. And I'm a firm believer of personifying the inner child, because when we do have wounding, we feel like we are that wounded inner child. And we are to a certain degree, but we also have a higher self. We have the ability to be able to relate and parent this part of us. So it is a part of us. It isn't us in totality. So I named my inner child Matthew, and I chose an age where I felt like I wanted to begin, which was probably like 6-7 years old. And I got some photos, and I started to just kind of connect with this part of myself. And then I did some letter writing, just kind of, I guess it would have been more journaling. I don't think I wrote a letter to my inner child, but it was more journaling about how I felt at that time. And I got some journal prompts that I can share with the audience, and maybe I'll send them to you after, so you can put them in the show notes or whatnot. And then I think reconnecting with the inner child, part of it is is play. I think most of us walk around this world, we're so serious. And we were conditioned when we were younger, don't be so silly, and smarten up and behave. And then when we get a job and we're like, oh, I got to be professional, and we walk and we're all so serious. And it's like, can we let that goofy, silly, playful part of us back, to come out and play? And I think that is that's the starting point, I would say. So once you're reconnected and you're plugged back in, then I think we can move into doing some healing work with this. Yeah. And one of the biggest things that I see in my work is people struggling because they never went through the victim stage of the things that they experienced when they were younger. There's two types of people. I think people that get stuck in the victimhood stage, and people that bypass the victimhood stage. And I'll speak to the latter, because that was more my experience. I think I just toughed it out and was pretended like these things didn't happen, or whatever it might have been, or I had to focus on supporting my family system, or whatever it was. So we have to consciously go back to that and let ourselves be wounded, let ourselves be hurt, let ourselves be angry, rageful, whatever those feelings are that are underlying these wounds. We have to go back and be with some of this stuff. And I think this is where the letter writing can be so beneficial, because it can start to get the juices flowing, so to speak, right? Bringing us back to some of the things that we experienced. And then once that part of us opens up again, the wounds open, we can do some grief work around this. We can grieve, maybe the childhood that we wanted that we didn't get. We can grieve the unmet needs that never went met when we were younger. So I think that's a really big part of this work, is that kind of that healing aspect. Yeah. Then the last part is the integration. So once we have done some of this reconnecting and healing work, that's when we reintegrate this part of us into us, as in we are holding this inner child. We now have the maturity to hold ourselves and love ourselves and parent ourselves. So this could look like having a dialogue with your inner child daily. Not just meeting your inner child when there's chaos. Let's meet our inner child when we're doing well and things are good, and we have a solid relationship with them. Always listening to your inner child. Your inner child tends to be, for people, very intuitive. So they pick up on everything in their environment. So that's part of our intuition, is our inner child. Constantly prioritizing the child's safety, and then acting in integral ways that ensure self-trust. Because most of us, our inner child doesn't trust us, because we have done things and acted in ways to cope that neglected or abandoned our inner child. So our inner child's like, wait a minute, like you want me just to trust you after like 20 years, you haven't even spoken to me. So we need to redevelop and reconnect to this inner child, and then it will integrate back into ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I'm for my own inner child, I connect with her. She has this like beautiful bedroom in my heart where she like hangs out. But I found I had to kind of meditate and create a real distance where she could be safe and like physically safe. And it's in a
Yeah.
space that no one can access but my mind. And like even going there, like I take a path that's like no one could figure it out, which is, I don't know, maybe that's part of that wounding of like, I'm going to protect myself. But
Yeah.
I have this really unique way I like draw the stars in my head and the space forms where she's there and safe. But I think for me, that's kind of been a step of like reclaiming her safety and a space where she can be like, I don't like what's going on, I'm going there, or, you know, giving her that. But when you're just starting that relationship and maybe that inner child doesn't feel like there's the trust or the safety, what are some things that people can do to kind of get that dialogue going so that trust can start to develop?
I think the biggest thing is to turn towards ourselves, because if you think about our culture really instills this notion of like distract, numb, right? Drugs, alcohol, work, porn, sex, food, like there's so many things that we can be distracting ourselves from. And the inner child will display him or herself through emotions, right? Emotional responses come up. That's the inner child speaking to us. And when we turn away from those emotions, we're saying that it's not okay for me to be feeling this, and we're invalidating our inner child. So when we learn the skill of presence and turning towards ourselves, that's the start of this work, because the work can't start if you're not present with yourself emotionally, right? The inner child also comes through as thoughts as well, so being present with your thoughts. So I love the fact that you have, you know, your meditation is to create a room for this inner child, and that's a great step, and that's like where we find safety. I do actually think the last step, you look at, you know, the integration for me, I don't think I've fully integrated my inner child yet, because full integration of the inner child would mean that I would feel safe to go out into the world and share my playfulness and share my joy and share all of this with the world, or at least the people that I feel safe with. And I still haven't made it to that place yet. There's still aspects of me that I feel guarded, and I feel like I don't trust people as easily as I would like to trust people. So it is a process, and I would really encourage people to not be too hard on themselves, and to just like, I have a magic question that I always say, you know, ask myself, and it's like, how can I be more gentle with myself in this moment? And truly, like I try my best to be like that, because I can be a really, really hard person on myself, and I think a lot of people can. And when we just remind ourselves, like center ourselves back into self-compassion and self-kindness, that's what the inner child needs to be met with. So if we're meeting ourselves with that, then we'll be able to start to meet our inner child with that, right? So it's a practice. It is.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think too, there's the balance of believing that the world is unsafe is not always wrong. Like there are places in our world where that, and I'm also a HSP, highly sensitive person, and I've always kind of wondered, okay, was this developed because I'm naturally sensitive, or was I in a household where I needed to get a sense of things that were going to happen before they happened? And I think that sense, when I get that, the kind of spider sense, or spidey senses as I'll call it, it's a thing of like, okay, what's going on here? And sometimes it's a true gut feel that it's like, I just hear in my mind, no. And it's like, you listen to it, I don't understand it. But it's, I don't know, for me, it's kind of this question of what are you working towards? Because I think there are places where, you know, like I even find that as an artist and putting my art out there, where it's not safe always for me to be creative and put myself out there. And especially doing something that's so esoteric as like, I'm a wax seal artist. That's not a thing, but it is a thing, you know, for me. But, and then that, like, not even talking about like physical safety, I'm just saying like creative safety. And with the internet being, you know, full of trolls and people who are going through their own things and insecure too, there's that level too. So it's this balance of like, how can you put yourself out there and be okay with criticism? And then what are the spaces where like, actually, you don't need to share that with them, or you don't need to interact with this person that makes you feel unsafe. Like, I don't think there's an answer to it, but I think that it's kind of on this spectrum of, it can be both true and false around safety and freedom.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, inner safety is what happens when we heal our inner child. Inner safety creates outer safety. And I think when we're being trolled online and we don't have an inner sense of safety, we troll ourselves. So
Yeah.
what these people say to us becomes true to us because we internalize it. Again, it's that parent ego. If we haven't healed the inner child, we can't heal the parent ego. The parent ego will start to get loud when other people troll us. So I think that it's important to have this inner sense of safety. And then, yeah, like you're right. We live in a very unsafe world, and we live in a place where a lot of places it's not safe to be yourself, especially if you come from a minority group. There's a lot of hatred out there. So I think it's, my work has been to establish safety within. And then when I do that, I get really discerning about like where to put myself out in the world. And, part of my trauma too, was I didn't have a good discernment. I wasn't prioritizing my needs. I didn't have strong boundaries. So I was attracting in like narcissistic people and all sorts of, just toxic energy because I didn't have strong boundaries, right? So that's been actually one of the byproducts of me doing a lot of inner child work is A, understanding my needs very clearly, and B, understanding my boundaries and being able to implement them fiercely. And now I feel like I've got a strong sense of safety because I know that I can feel my emotions and I can regulate them. I can understand my needs and get them met, and I can set boundaries around all of that so I can feel and I can need in a healthy way, right? It's so critical.
Yeah. No, it's really beautiful. And I just, as you're talking, I'm realizing too how much societal conditioning is around stuff too. And like, I think for boys, and obviously I can't speak to this as much as you can, obviously, but that sense of like needing to be like tough or not show emotions. Like I even see that coming up when my son cries. I'm like fine with it, and like want to sit with him and be like, what are you feeling? What's going on? And my parents are just like, shut it down, and like the same happened with my niece. My sister was saying that like the parents thought she was trying to get attention. I was like, we're both like, no, she has an emotional need. And like, it's a joke in our family, not a funny joke, but like, are you needy or do you have needs? And like how it's handled differently. But I do think there's a societal stigma, especially against men, for having that vulnerability with their emotions and being able to actually express whatever that boundary is that they're feeling. And like women have it on another side, like especially around anger and like how women are allowed to express anger. But I don't know, I just feel like it's very complicated. It's not that you can just make the world what your inner life is, but you are cultivating something that then you're bringing to the world. And I'm a firm believer that the more people get into that softer side of themselves, like it softens the world.
I fully agree. It's interesting when I do inner child work with men. I would say I work with, I don't know, 80% males and 20% female, and so I do a lot of men's work. And it's amazing how when you break through all the stuff that men build around their hearts, which anger is the biggest one in my opinion, it's fear. Men are scared. Men are terrified. Men have so much pressure put on them, and they don't feel safe to be able to share that they have a lot of pressure and that they're scared. So it comes out as anger, violence, aggression. And when we can connect with that scared, wounded little boy inside, the healing it's miraculous. It's so beautiful. And it's interesting because women get the opposite conditioning for the most part. They get the conditioning of be a good little girl, and you're not allowed to be angry, and otherwise you'll be a bitch, right? All this messaging that they get. So women tend to be fawning. That's their trauma response. They fawn, they please, they perform all these things, and they don't get the space to be angry and to be fierce. And so I do see that this is changing a bit, but there's so much more consciousness that needs to be brought to this. Yeah, I use a phrase, and I've been using it daily because I've been doing a lot of work around fear, because I had a pretty scary upbringing in certain aspects, and I didn't allow myself to feel the fear. I went into control and anger and power,
Yeah.
and which a lot of guys do. So I've been saying to myself, I am or it is safe to, or I'm safe to be scared. I'm safe to be scared right now. It's okay to be scared, and just allowing myself to be with my fears, as opposed to
Yeah.
building up all these walls around my fears and pretending like they don't exist or that they're not as bad as they are. You
Yeah.
know, what I'm meeting is humility. I'm meeting
Mhm.
vulnerability. I'm
Yeah.
meeting a softer, tender part of who I am. And I think this is essential if we want, you know,
Yeah.
healthier relationships on this planet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely feel that. And I think that same mantra, you could put whatever emotion it is. So like
Exactly.
maybe it's there, I'm, safe to be angry. It's safe to not know. It's safe to
Yeah.
be sad. Like whatever that conditioning is. Well, I know you alluded to the journal prompts, and so maybe we could think
Yeah.
a little bit about, or talk a little bit about, okay, starting writing things. Where do we start writing in our communication?
Yeah. So I would recommend, the question that I always get my clients to start with is, what needs went unmet for me in childhood?
Mhm.
It's the golden question, in my opinion, because that will lead us to our needs now, right? All the needs that we had unmet in childhood are the ones that are so important for us now. And a lot of us, let's say we had a need for attention when we were younger and we were shamed for having that need.
Mhm.
We shut it off. But that doesn't mean that the need goes away. If it goes, it's stored in the subconscious part of us, and then we act out, and we might become promiscuous. We might, whatever, do different things. We might manipulate people to give us attention. So we learn how to get this need met, but we're doing it in unhealthy and indirect ways. So
Mhm.
when we can understand the need and bring it from the subconscious to the conscious, we're
Yeah.
able to say, I have this need. And we can ask our partner and say, listen, I love when you're attentive to me. Can you practice being more attentive to me? And we ask for attention. And
Yeah.
for a lot of people, having the need is vulnerable, but asking for it is like, there is no way I'm
Oh my
asking
gosh.
for,
Yeah.
right? It's like so vulnerable, but that's when that's when everything changes. So we
Yeah.
gotta, when inner child work is meant to help us get clear about what our needs are, so we can therefore start to create safety, right? A
Yeah.
person who's getting their needs met is a safe person. They feel safe. A
Yeah.
person who's not getting their needs met does not feel safe, and then they have to act out in these very indirect and manipulative ways to try and get their needs met, which just creates more unsafe environments, right?
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
would say start with that question. And then my colleague, actually, we recorded right before this, we did a similar one, so he gave me all these great prompts
Yeah.
that he uses with his clients. So what was I most worried about as a child, and how did I cope with that?
Mhm. Mhm.
What desires went unmet, and how did I cope with that? What role did I play in my family dynamic? What was I rewarded for, and what was I punished for? Again, looking at that classical conditioning, and what needs when I met for me in childhood. So, um, and I would get out a picture of you and
Yeah.
just have that picture sitting there, and just start to tune into the energy of like, who
Mhm.
was I as a little boy or a little girl? Like, what was my essence at that time? And then
Mhm.
starting to really examine, like, with these questions, it can be a really powerful process, very emotional, brings up
Yeah.
a lot of emotions for people. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, and do you have advice about kind of this kind of psychological safety that someone might want when they're starting to do this work? Like if they don't have a counselor already,
Yeah.
or just because I'm imagining it brings up a lot of stuff. And I don't know,
Mhm.
just any advice for people if they are starting and they want a little bit more support around them.
Yeah. Um, I have a saying that I use is, don't meet your child in a state of being a hot mess. So like, we don't, when we're in chaos, don't go and try and work with your inner child. Or when things are,
Yeah.
like, we want to work with the inner child, and we want to approach it from a place of somewhat stable energy.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think it's important to have someone, whether it's a friend, a coach, a therapist, a
Mhm.
counselor, anybody that can support you through this process will be helpful. Um, but as far as creating an internal sense of safety, um, I'm a firm believer of like, creating kind of like a sacred space. My home is my temple, and I'm very protective of my home, and it's like this like cozy environment, and get into your pajamas, and like I don't know, I like that. So we want to create a safe space to be able to do this work, and I think that's important. So you could set up a little altar, or whatever that would look like for you, and then have that there. But as far as like what you're saying, I think it's important to have a support network. Letting a good friend or whatever know that you're going to embark on doing this work, I think can be important, because suddenly we can just be overtaken with emotion. It's like, I need somebody to talk to, right? And for a lot of people, our inner child will that's part of the wounding, is it's like, I don't feel safe reaching out to people. I don't feel like I can depend on people because people weren't there for me again. So we need to like work through that. We need to advocate to have people there. And that's why I kind of like therapy and counseling, because I see a therapist every week for myself as well, and I like the transaction. It's predictable, it's safe, it's always there when it's reliable, whereas sometimes a friend can't be there for you. So I kind of like the idea of having a therapeutic relationship to fall back on when I need it.
Definitely. Well, and two, it's not that therapists don't bring in their own biases and worldviews and everything, but they're trained to kind of work with it in a way that serves you. Where with a friend, like I had a friend a while back, and it kind of fell apart because we both had similar backgrounds with narcissists. And I don't know if that was specifically why it fell apart, but I saw we had similar trauma in a way. And like there wasn't a way to kind of unpack situations easily without it bringing up something in the other person. And so I can just see where a counselor might be better. Or if it's a sibling, like it could be really helpful in some ways, but then in other ways it might not too, because they have their own trauma. Or like even just in, not to share like too much about my family, but like my older sister was so protective of me in a really good way. But that's a level of trauma she probably has that I don't, because she was in a more of a parental role in some cases, where I still was able to be the kid because I'm the youngest. So I can see too where it's like kind of understanding what you're unpacking, and like these are the places to look. So it might be friend, might be good family member, might be counselor. You have to kind of feel it out a bit.
And you'll get something different from, say, your sister than you would a therapist, because yes, you're going to get you're going to get a shared energetic resonance with your sister, right? It might not be the same, because you're right, she had a different experience of that, but she was picking up the same energy that whatever the source of trauma was caused, right? So you guys can share in that. And I've had some beautiful, I remember a couple of years ago, I was just really struggling going through my second dark night, and like I called up my sister and I was like, can we just talk? And we just like had this like amazingly beautiful conversation where we both just like cried together and talked about like the things that we experienced as a child. And she has a different recollection because she's a different person. But for me, it was like, it was healing, because I was able to see like that this is a perception that I created around an event that happened to me, and she created one as well. And this is, you look at trauma, and it's like the thing that's traumatic is not so much the event that we experience as the meaning we make of that event, right? And that's where a lot of the healing can take place, is like when we see a therapist or we're doing this work, we're helping like heal, but part of the healing is we're making new meaning, right? And I always say, like, from a spiritual perspective, like suffering becomes less sufferable, I guess, when we make meaning of what we've experienced. Right. And I think, like, to draw it back to letter writing, it's like, when we are writing a letter from this person now, not the person that's wounded, we're again, it's part of that process of making meaning of what we experienced, and looking at it through the lens of this shaped me. This is like why I am who I am. Like, I went through a lot of these experiences as a child that were very traumatic, led to a lot of suffering, but that's why I have depth now. And that's how I can relate to my clients in such a deep way, is because I've been through what I've been through. So again, and that looking for that meaning has helped me heal.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, when you think about like you can't obviously go back and actually change things, but when you're working with the inner child, you can give that hope of, this isn't going to be forever, and this is
Yeah.
the beautiful life you have. And I love when you're talking about working from a place where you're well resourced and doing great when you work with
Mhm.
them. And a lot of my work as an artist is very playful, and
Yeah.
even like the idea of doing something that people don't understand, like I mentioned earlier, that's
Mhm.
a very child like thing to do. Of, I just think this is fun. And like in my office, I have a little portrait, or a little photo of myself framed where I'm holding a trout and I'm in the High Sierra, and it was a place where I just felt such confidence and peace. And
Mm.
the people I was always with in the High Sierra, I just felt so safe and loved as a kid. And so I bring her with me when I'm doing art. And I just, that, yeah, that reassurance I can give her of, there's so much beauty to come. Like what you want in a, friendship, or you want to get married someday, like that is out there for you.
Mm.
And whatever, fear you might have now, it's it's not always going to be that way. Like I think that that's one of the things that's healing. Like even though it's hard to touch some of those things that come up for me, that then there's this sense of not just it having served a purpose, because I do feel like part of that is just something we do need to tell ourselves, even if it is true, just to make it, I don't know, maybe make the grief of it not as hard. Because
Mm.
I still do grieve a lot of what I wanted as a childhood and what I got, and also still having great things and a lot of privilege too.
Mhm.
But yeah, that sense of kind of giving something to the inner child of what's coming in the future, and having them see that thriving. Or, and I'm off on a little bit of a tangent, but even just like when I'm driving my car, sometimes I bring her with me, and she's so psyched to like drive a car down the road. Like no one ever let her do that. And like we get to go to the grocery store, we can honk the horn, like we can scream in the car, like
Yeah.
all the things I was not allowed to do. I can even have like snacks in the car. My mom was good about that, but not all of our cars you're allowed to have snacks. So just like those little things that you can kind of do, and
Yeah.
in bringing them along in a way that is playful and joyful. I don't know if that speaks to kind of the other side of what you were mentioning.
Yeah, I think it's good. And I do think, when we're doing this work, it's easy for us to lose sight of the things that we experience that were beautiful. And I experienced this when I was, doing this work as well. I was like, man, like, do I have any positive childhood memories? That's what but it's because the brain, when it's in that kind of unresolved trauma state, it's like fight or flight.
Yeah.
We're hyper focused on survival, right? So
Yeah.
when we're hyper focused on survival, we're always looking for the next thing that's dangerous that we need to stay away from. So we become hyper vigilant. So
Yeah.
when that settles and we soften, then suddenly the positive childhood memories start to come back again. So I would say just take time when you're doing this work. Yeah, probably start with the things that you're wanting to heal, and maybe go back and to deal with some of that stuff, but
Mhm.
also have moments where you're just going to sit down and do some journaling on like the
Yeah.
beautiful memories that you had as a child and all these things, because that's just as therapeutic, that's just as healing
Yeah.
than that it is going and focusing on the things that you had to endure, right? They're both
Yeah.
very important.
That's really beautiful. And I mean, for me, I had it very clearly. I'd spend my a good chunk of summer in Santa Barbara living with my aunt and uncle, and like my aunt would just keep me there, and
Mm.
my mom would call and be like, send her home, and she's like, I can't, like I just signed her up for zoo camp, I signed her up for like, I don't know, however many camps, surf camp. I went into like every single camp you can do in Santa Barbara as a kid.
Yeah.
But I have so many memories from that. And it also, like, I only have one semi-traumatic thing, and it was literally just that I threw a ball in my aunt and uncle's gardens, and the dog like wrecked the garden. But like it
Yeah.
wasn't dangerous for me. I just felt bad that I wrecked their beautiful garden.
Yeah.
But yeah, like having some of those places where you can go and like, oh, that is a place where there's so much joy. And
Yeah.
even in my art now, I have so much inspired by Santa Barbara,
Mm.
because it's that place where the child just feels love and beauty. And I have a lot from my hometown too, but I really like that idea. And one thing I wanted to ask, so I had an idea of a letter
Mhm.
where I would use seed paper, and I sent you
Mhm.
some, so you can write a letter.
Yeah.
And I want to get your idea on how you think it would be best to use it, because I thought it might be kind of a fun thing to like light a candle, invite your inner child to write a letter with you, and
Mm.
maybe put the things that both of you want in the world, of like, this is what I want in our life together, or our relationship. and then you fold it up and you plant it. And the paper, I think you plant it like an inch under the ground. It's not very much under the ground.
Yeah.
And from it grows wildflowers. And so it's this beautiful symbol of taking like the words and the relationship and then actually having it blossom. But if you had any ideas around kind of partnering with your inner child and writing a
Mhm.
letter, and what kind of things you might want to talk about there. Again, like maybe along the theme of things that can be buried and gone, or like things that can be
Mhm.
planted and grow.
Yeah. I would probably say sitting down and having a conversation with the inner child around the unmet needs. Like, what sort of unmet needs did you experience? Like, again, like part of reparenting is that we have to, well, there's actually a definition. I think this might come in handy. Um, where is it here? So Dr. Nicole LaPera, the holistic psychologist, says healing the inner child involves becoming a wise inner parent to ourselves that sees and hears our experience without judgment. So when we're doing inner child work, I think it's important to approach the inner child from like, we're the parent now. We're the higher self, and we're here to hold that child through whatever it needs to be held through. So I think it's like letting the inner child have a voice. And so maybe you could interview your inner child and like
Yeah.
ask them, like, what did you, right? So you're kind of like approaching it from like a bird's eye view, and then writing down all the things so your inner child feels really heard.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're like, okay, well, we're gonna bury all these things and we're gonna transmute them. And then we're going to have another interview on like, what do you need now?
Yeah.
Like, these are all the unmet needs. This is the grief. This is what we're healing. But what do we need now? That's kind of the empowerment. And then
Yeah.
the inner child starts to reclaim its voice. Right. And
Mhm.
I think there's something really powerful about that. I've been doing voice work for the last 9 months, started working with a vocal
Mhm.
coach, and man, I did not think, like, I've done tons of therapy throughout my life. I did not think vocal coaching would be as potent as it was. And holy, it
Yeah.
kicked my butt because there was so much stuff in my vocal cords and everything around like silence, don't speak.
Yeah.
I've been hurt. Don't tell people. Or all this energy was all being moved.
Yeah.
So I think when we do allow our inner child the voice back,
Yeah.
it has a lot to say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, too, like every child is a good singer. And I think like as a
Yeah.
society, we even just singing, we're like, no, there's good singers and there's bad singers. And it's like,
Yeah.
do you have a voice? Then you're a good singer. Like that's,
Yeah.
you enjoy singing, then you're a good singer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to a retreat in January where we did a lot of breath work that was really cathartic, and just, I was sobbing of like whatever was
Wow.
coming off my chest. And
Yeah.
it was like all held in here. And then I felt stuff moving up. And I started working with tuning forks and like putting the tuning forks
Yeah.
on. And that was really interesting. And like over a few months, I noticed things kind of vibrating and moving. And then no one mentioned vocal coaching, but I got an app just to do it. And like it's really neat because you're learning how to use like different sounds, and it's very, yeah, it's amazing you're mentioning it, because I was doing that on my own, feeling like, wow, this is really healing. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm able to speak from a place that's deeper. And especially in the time that we live in where things are so visible in some ways, like even this conversation and not knowing where it's going to go out,
Yeah.
the kind of the older masked versions of me would try to like, maybe it's people please, of just like match what that person wants to hear or needs to
Yeah.
hear. And it's becoming more like, no, first, what do I have to say? And hopefully somebody else, that's what they need to hear. But it's like, it's a shift, I think, when you start working with your voice. It's like the
Yeah.
physical voice leads to the spiritual voice.
Yeah. I agree fully.
Yeah.
I think one thing I want to say is
Mhm.
embodiment when doing this letter writing, because I think sometimes we can be very cerebral and we can write down all these ideas and stuff, but we're not connected to the experience. And I think so embodying is important. So I love how you use breath,
Mhm.
taking conscious breaths before you do your writing, putting your feet on the ground, taking your socks off, and just like feeling your rooting down, sitting in the chair, feeling the heaviness of you being held by the seat that you're sitting in. Like, these things are essential, because when we start to meet the unmet needs or the grief or the sadness or the anger or anything that's within this inner child in us,
Yeah.
we want to be present to that. And we
Yeah.
can only be present when we're embodied. So what I do is I'll hold my hand on sensations Like, so let's say I start writing and I feel like a twinge of sadness come through, like I want to cry, but maybe it doesn't come through. I'll hold my hand right where I felt that. Right. And it's just like, maybe you're not ready to come yet, but I'm going to honor that sensation that just came
Yeah.
up. And then I'll feel something else and I'll put my hand there. So we can meet ourselves with presence in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And, but embodied letter writing, I would say, is probably extremely critical in this work.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of research about the connection with your hand and your brain. And people who listen to the podcast probably heard me say, like, handwriting isn't handwriting, it's brain writing, which a woman named Elaine Charles, who specializes in handwriting analysis, is really kind of fun topic where you can see your personality mapped in your script and how to change things in your life by writing. But when we write these letters, it is important that it's not just coming from the brain, but that you're really feeling it. And so I'd say, to take time, close your eyes, touch your hands to your chest. If you feel something, even just humming, like, make noise where you're feeling it. And then when you write it, it is connecting it all through. And so it's going, that movement is actually, it's transforming something, it's shifting it. And then you can do the ceremony around, like, sending it. You could burn it or bury it. I think burying is really neat because it's not getting rid of it forever. Like, it still exists, which to me seems like a way of kind of honoring the experience, both the good and the bad, and not saying I don't want to see this anymore, like it's burned. Like, I want to hold this and, like, give it to earth and, like, see what happens from this. It's a little bit different. Well, I know we're getting close to time here, so we'll put the journal prompts in the notes for anyone who's here. And I imagine it's one that they'll probably want to bookmark and, like, keep coming back to this conversation. I just feel so touched by what you've shared, and kind of seeing, like, the real depth of these letters is so beautiful.
Yeah, I'm excited, and you've inspired me. And thank you for the wax kit. That was, like, so generous. Like, it was such a beautiful gift to get, and, like, I love getting mail like that. It was pretty cool. And I did do it, and it allowed me to connect my inner child. I was like, ooh, like arts and crafts, and I got it all set up. And so you created a really cool experience for me. So thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, if there's anything I've learned from my inner child, is, like, probably every inner child loves crafts. So anything to make it more creative. And that seal, it's truth love. It's the palm with the heart in it. And I just feel like that's so much about healing and about our connection to our inner child, to ourself, to the world, is, like, honoring your truth, loving your truth, embodying it. And the sealing is, like, a very much a, physical act too. It's very ceremonial. And I think with inner child letters, you could do a seal if you wanted, but ultimately you're probably not going to keep a sealed letter around. You want to move it in some way. And so for this episode, I didn't prepare any specific seals that people should be using, but if there are, for any of you who are listening, if there are particular motifs that you think your inner child would be drawn to, you can draw those in the letter and, like, create an artistic representation. Doesn't have to be out of wax.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, this has just been beautiful. Thank you very much, Matt. And I'll put in the notes the link to your YouTube and your website and your free course. Can you just tell us a little bit about the free course too, so anyone that's listening can learn a little bit more before they take it?
Yeah, so it's called Embody Your Truth course, and it's got 7 of my most powerful teachings around embodying your truth and becoming your most authentic self, and just looking at kind of the things that get in the way of us being able to just fully embody, and how to work with those parts of ourselves that are afraid to embody our truth. And so yeah, it's a spiritual course. It's a 7-day, just some potent teachings in 7 days for that. And I got some guided meditations on my website as well that would probably be really helpful for people. One of them is called the trauma embodiment and trauma release guided meditation, and that one's a really powerful one if you do have unprocessed childhood trauma that you want to work with. So it's basically just, it'll help you get into your body. So that might actually be good in conjunction with the letter writing, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. So maybe doing that guided meditation first, connecting with some of the energy, and then sitting down and writing a letter, right? Could be very beneficial. So
beautiful. I'll put notes for that there as well. Yeah, and I just, I think about letters as a way to connect people. And when we live in a world that's so fast paced and so digital, that this is a way for us to slow down. But I feel like this letter to the child is like actually where it all starts. And like,
Yeah.
I'm so excited for anyone that's listening to this who hasn't started connecting with their inner child, because there's a relationship that's probably one of the most meaningful relationships of their life that they're just going to discover and start to work on.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Amazing.
well, wonderful. Well, thank you again.
Yeah, you bet. I'm honored to be here.
Wait one second. No, I gotta stop the recording.